Hello, this is A-level psychology, and this is looking at social influence unit and explanations of minority influence. In the last video, we looked at Moscovici's research, and in this video, we're going to look at basically 3 explanations of minority influence and the evidence that we have for them. So let's have a look. These are the 3 processes, basically, which we use as explanations for minority influence: consistency, commitment, and flexibility. Now, consistency, there's 2 types of consistency that we look for in a minority that really help to communicate and get their message across and make them more persuasive. Firstly, synchronic consistency means that everyone in the minority group, all members of the group, say the same thing. So you've not got an inconsistent message from different members of the group. And the second kind of consistency that makes a difference is called diachronic consistency, which means that over time they're giving the same message. So if you think about some kinds of minority influence, they've taken a long time to make a difference and to make a change. So for example, environmental campaigners about plastic have been going for a really, really long time, for many decades, and they've been saying the same thing over time. So we're not thinking just about like juries in some of these examples coming up, which is a relatively short-term thing. We need to start thinking, and I'll give you some more examples in this video of social change that has happened as a result of a minority over time. Commitment is the second process, and that's where you can show commitment by engaging in like risky activities or extreme activities, basically often that have some element of cost or sacrifice to yourself. That sort of thing makes people take notice and say, well, actually, if this person is prepared to do this to persuade other people about this issue, then actually it must be really important. So that's commitment. And people often are confused about that. So make sure you kind of learn that that's what that means, showing commitment by doing something that involves sacrifice or something that's risky. Flexibility, the last one, we talked briefly about this at the end of Moscovici's study. Flexibility is being prepared to adapt a little bit when you're trying to persuade a majority. So, for example, in Nemeth and Brillmeyer's study, which was the one we talked about, the minority that managed to persuade the majority, they were doing stuff like, well, yes, I agree on this point that you're making, but I still think he's guilty or he's innocent or whatever. So when people are arguing against them, they're not just flatly denying it. They're saying, well, I can see your point, I accept that, however. So they're adapting, they're accepting reasonable points that the other side makes, but they're still sticking to their argument. So that's what being flexible is about. Okay, let's look at in fact, I just had another idea. If you think about a more trivial example than some of the others that we'll look at, where we were talking about the students who were trying to argue about which nightclub to go to, what that could look like is if someone said, oh, the drinks are really good in this nightclub, and the minority who wanted to go to a different one could say, oh, yeah, the drinks are really good and they're probably better than this nightclub that we want to go to. However, this nightclub is better because of this, and this. So they're agreeing with them that the drinks are better, but they're not. They're still sticking to the thrust of their argument. Right, let's look at some evaluation. So in terms of consistency, your evaluation is that it's supported by research, supported by Moscovici's study. It's got evidence behind it. It's not just an idea that's pie in the sky. We've got empirical research evidence to back it up, and that's Moscovici's study. And that's because the consistent minority had a much bigger influence on the majority than the inconsistent minority. Okay, right. Commitment. Here's some examples from everyday life. This is what we've got to support this idea of commitment. You may be aware of some of these already. Here we've got Nelson Mandela, who, as you may know, spent 27 years in prison for what he was trying to do. Then there was Martin Luther King, who, as you probably know, was assassinated. What we've got in the middle here, you may have studied the suffragettes at your secondary school. There was a great personal, remember commitment being where you're doing something that requires sacrifice. It's a risky activity that has a personal cost. The suffragettes got themselves arrested and then they were force-fed in prison, and so that was showing commitment. They were prepared to be arrested and do those sorts of things. There was also Emily Wilding Davis, wasn't there, who flung herself in front of the King's horse. So there's various examples there. Over here we've got Rosa Parks, who received death threats and various other things as a result of the action that she took to challenge, to try and improve civil rights. And then there were early Christians were fed to the lions. So all of those are examples of people who were in a minority, who are trying to change something, and they've, as a result, had great personal cost to themselves. So that's just the list of those people. So that shows the fact that we've got many historic examples to back up the idea of commitment being persuasive. That supports the idea of commitment and its role in minority influence. And you wouldn't need to, by the way, learn all of these. It would be absolutely fine to learn one or two examples of these that you could talk about really well. And then we've got flexibility is the last one that we need to evaluate. And this one, we've got that Nemeth and Brillmare study, where you've got the jury study where the flexible minority were the most persuasive. But the question really to ask on this one, and I guess this is more of a weakness of the idea of flexibility, is what's the difference between being inconsistent and being flexible? If you're going to accept some of the points of view of the other side, how do you stop that from being inconsistent? It's a bit of a grey area, and so that's a bit of a weakness of the idea of flexibility. So there we go, quite a short video, that one, and that's explanations of minority influence.